Okay, so today we will start emotional development, which is a very, I think, interesting and fun chapter. And we will talk about both babies' first quests to establish emotional connections, what helps them along the way, their first significant relations, could be with their mothers, could be with caregivers. Also, what do they come into this world with? Do they have emotional dispositions? Do they have different temperaments? You know how each of you have different personalities. How much of this is observable in babies? And so we will talk about all of this. So emotions are rapid appraisals of personal situations of personal significance. And the functionalist perspective tells us that emotions are good for something. That's why it's functionalist. That it energizes our behavior, it motivates our behavior, and it also prepares us for action. And so you can see that emotions have different functions, cognitive, social, and also health-wise. For example, they influence our well-being. They influence children's growth too. So children who are under a lot of stress, for example, may be impacted in their health as well. There are stress-related diseases that we all know. Also, they have social functions. They affect the behavior of others. The emotions we display also affect other people's behaviors toward us, but it also regulates our own behavior. It regulates how we're going to act in social situations. Also has cognitive significance, can lead to learning, meaning emotions can tell us what is rewarding and what is not, for example. But they can also impair learning and memory. So math anxiety, for example, is an emotion, and it does impair one's learning in an area because of that fear that is associated with that area. And so learning and emotions, cognition and emotions, are bidirectional. It's not just that emotions affect learning and cognition, but cognition also affects emotions. That's why when we talk about self-regulation, for example, we say that we can tell ourselves, for example, to calm down when we are overexcited or nervous, right? We can try to see the bright side in a sad situation. Again, we're using cognition to regulate our emotions. So where does it start? Infants start early on establishing what's called primary intersubjectivity. It is the base from which all social learning will develop, and it's this face-to-face, one-on-one sharing. So this is different than joint attention. We talked about joint attention in language section. In joint attention, we kept emphasizing this triadic relation between one agent, another agent, and an object. So the child, the mother, and a moving train, for example. But in this case, we are looking at, before joint attention, we have primary intersubjectivity, which is this face-to-face, eye contact, this shared space between the two. Now, babies actively seek and contribute to the maintenance of this kind of interaction. And we remember that infants have these early preferences, that they like looking at faces, that they prefer their mother's face. They actually also like looking at the eyes, too. And so all of this prepares the infant for establishing social relations. So evidence for babies' responsiveness to primary subjectivity, I'm going to show you two pieces of evidence. We're going to watch a video for the first one, which is the still-faced paradigm of Tronick. Now here, what they did is they basically wanted to figure out what happens if the expected communication between the infant and the mother is interrupted. So when babies seek to establish primary intersubjectivity, they expect that the adult will also attend to them, will look at them, will smile at them. And if they are making sounds, they expect the adult to make sounds. So this is like a two-way road, right? But what happens if the mother or the adult who's interacting with the child withdraws attention? And this is a very striking video in my case. I kind of get choked up at the end always, a little bit tearful. I won't cry, I promise. But and we're going to talk about the implications of this in a second. So let's watch the video first. Here we saw that Tronic said that, it's the good, the bad, the ugly. And let's talk about the ugly a little bit. So the good is good, and we don't need to talk about it. We know that it actually forms the foundation of the social relationships, later attachment. The bad, it's unavoidable. From time to time, mother may not be able to attend to the baby. Actually, when mothers and children are together, it's about 30% of the time that the mother actually engages in this kind of interaction. So it's normal, because mothers are also human beings who have to also take care of the baby in other ways, prepare food. So you can't expect a mother to be glued to their baby's face 24/7. But it happens with frequency, and babies get a lot from it. How about the ugly? When does the ugly happen? Depression isn't only the mother's mental health issue, it also affects the child's social, emotional, and even cognitive development. And so it has far-reaching implications. So this is also important because mothers may experience depression after birth, right? We call it postpartum depression. Not all mothers experience it. But a significant percentage of mothers actually are at risk for developing postpartum depression. And postpartum depression is not about that mother not loving their baby. It is not about being a bad mother, but it is very scary, especially for first-time mothers and even mothers who've had other children before. A woman may experience postpartum depression in her second or third pregnancy. There is no guarantee they won't experience it if they hadn't had it with their first child. So it brings on all these issues of also guilt, because they're feeling lethargic, they feel like they can't take care of the baby, it becomes a huge burden for them, and they feel like they're a bad person, a bad mother, because they're feeling all of these things which they can't help, so it spirals out of control. But what the baby gets is this mother who has flat affect, who infrequently smiles, or actually engages in primary intersubjectivity, and then doesn't have a foundation from which to build these social relations. I have asked in previous times that I've taught this course, what would you do if you found out that you have postpartum depression? Would you actually take medication to treat it? At that time, even after me talking, I've always seen a few hands, sometimes more than a few, saying that they wouldn't resort to taking medication. But it is a mental health issue, and it needs to be treated because of these implications. Waiting for it to go is actually wasting precious time of the infant and the time that could be spent building a relationship with the kid. The main concern, it seems, of those students who said they probably would not be taking medication is that they would be nursing. So I would like to remind you that there are substitutes for mother's milk, although it is very nutritious, very good for the baby. But there are substitutes, but there is no substitute for primary intersubjectivity. There is no way that you can compensate it if it's lost. And so I would think that you would always, being a parent is about judging the pros and cons, weighing the alternatives as to how much they cost. So if at one hand you have nothing to replace it with, I would say go take medication if it's prescribed by your doctor and you're being monitored, so that you make sure that your baby doesn't waste any time and learns to establish good relations, not just loving relations, but they learn how to attend to people through you. And so this was what, I hope someday you remember. I hope nobody experiences postpartum depression to start with, Allah korusun. But if you do, this is something to remember. So we saw what though? We also saw, which was interesting, was that the baby wasn't passive. So even for a very young infant, we see that the baby was active in trying to get the mother back to attend to her, right? She pointed, she made sounds like da, she shrieked and yelled, she changed posture. And at one point, we see even the beginnings of the baby's own ability to regulate themselves. When the emotions became too far, what did the baby do? The baby looked away, right? You know how when you see something that's too much for you, it could be a scene in a movie, for example, it's too scary, too bloody, whatever it is, you turn away or you close your eyes. That is also to regulate, because it is becoming too much for you, you're regulating that emotion. The baby has started doing that by looking away. And so we see how this is a bidirectional relation, how intersubjectivity is established, not just through the mother, but through the baby's efforts as well. We also have evidence for primary intersubjectivity through what is called delayed transmission paradigm. Here, the baby and the mother interact over live camera feed, like Skype, FaceTime, whatever, but it is live, but they are not together. The baby is seeing the mother in the monitor. And they delay the transmission such that the mother's reactions come to the baby a few seconds late. You know how, irritating it is with us? Sometimes it happens. Sometimes you call somebody and it echoes, for example, or you hear your own voice. That's unexplainably irritating. But the interesting thing is, we understand the baby has intermodal perception. Remember, was an exam question. They expect the synchrony, right? And not only between the mother's, say, gestures and sound, but they expect also a synchrony between themselves and whoever they're interacting with. And once that synchrony is interrupted, even young babies become agitated. So they understand that something is wrong. And here it is as little as 2 seconds actually are enough to give the baby pause. So we understand that they have strong expectations of primary intersubjectivity. Okay. This is what we talked about. This is also what we talked about. I do think that they associate positive emotions with smiling. It is hard to say whether they understand happiness the way we understand it. But I think smiling, when they smile, they feel positive, and they expect others to feel positive when they smile too. And yes, this is a very good question, because the primary intersubjectivity is not just about attention. It is also this positively flavored sharing between two, right? Because one could be very didactic, for example, and it is hard to get babies to attend when they are not enjoying it either. A very good question. Okay, so newborns seem to show two emotions, approach and avoidance. Emotional responses develop due to maturation, integration of facial expressions with feeling based on the goals and context. So they also experience when they want something and they get it, they, for example, will smile. So it's going to be associated. The basic emotions are very much the same across cultures. So even if we look at newborn infants, we see that the facial expression for joy, for fear, for anger, for sadness, for surprise are similar. There's also congruence between babies' facial expressions for these basic emotions and adults, our own basic expression of them. They're universally recognized as well. Yes. Now, when we look at happiness, we see that babies smile from birth, but at first, your friend was correct in asking how much they know that smiling is associated with happiness. Probably not all that much. But it becomes a social smile 6 to 10 weeks, meaning they smile back. When somebody smiles, they will start smiling back. We can think about the effect of maturation in terms of imitation, for example. They may still not be understanding that person is happy, I'm happy that they're happy. Probably not. But they are imitating the social cue as well. See, they laugh at 3 to 4 months. Why is the delay? Smile comes earlier than laughing. Why do you think laughing is late? Yes, Elif.
It may require some cognitive abilities.
Yes, you have to make a quick assessment. So when you laugh at something, you actually process really fast. If it's slower, you smile, right? There isn't a delayed laughter. I mean, it happens when somebody tells you a very bad joke and you laugh to make them happy, I guess. But in real life, when we laugh, it's because we have registered what is funny about what we're laughing at really fast. Yes. By the end of the first year, it becomes a deliberate social signal, meaning the baby might smile to get somebody's attention, not only smile back. Anger, we see general distress from birth. 4 to 6 months, we see more explicit displays of anger. We understand the baby's angry. It increases with age. Sadness is less common than anger. It's often a response to disruption in caregiver-infant communication. As a negative emotion, then anger is quicker to develop and is more prevalent early on. Fear first starts 6 to 12 months. In order to fear too, you need a cognitive appraisal, right, to know what you are fearing from. And we will see in attachment 2 in this lecture that between 8 to 12 months, babies start fearing, so that's where Toprak is, strangers. Before then, for example, Emre Bey could take Toprak as a bundle of joy and give it to his best friend, give him to his best friend to hold, and Toprak would be fine. But starting around 8 months, they start being weary of strangers and not wanting to be placed in their laps or their arms. They want to build a relationship before. And so this is actually a very healthy thing. It also shows that they are, so for one thing, they now know who are familiar people and who are always going to be there. It's not just a recognition of mom or preference of mom, just by their, preferring their voice or preferring their face. But this is more feeling safe with the familiar person and feeling unsafe with someone who's not familiar. And this is important. We'll discuss this more in attachment. For fear, temperament plays a role, meaning there are more fearful babies and there are less fearful babies, but temperament is coming up in 20 slides, and we're going to talk about fearful children then. So self-conscious emotions. We talked about basic emotions, and we said they are universal. The expression of them doesn't really need most coaching. All babies across the world, whether they're born in Korea, Zambia, Turkey, France, or Canada, seem to express their sadness, their happiness, their anger in much the same ways, in their facial expressions. However, we also know that not all emotions are basic. Some of them are culturally constructed and culturally transmitted. So we teach children without knowing we are. Children learn from us that there is something called shame, embarrassment, guilt, envy, and pride. Put envy aside, but shame, embarrassment, guilt, and pride require that the child engages in comparison, right? They require, for example, for shame, for somebody to be ashamed of something, they need to understand whatever they did was wrong, that there are standards, there are norms, right? And, for example, if a child is caught stealing from a cookie jar, they should feel a little bit of shame. We shame children, right? When we go like this, you shouldn't do this because there are rules. Embarrassment. If, for example, have you ever found out that, say, you had a smear on your face that you didn't know about, or, you know, your zipper wasn't fully up and you're walking around. I'm sure it has happened to every one of us at least once. And there's a shame, embarrassment attached to it too. Meaning, again, you are thinking that they have perceived me in a way that I don't want to be perceived. Again, there is some kind of comparison. So this starts emerging middle of second year, doesn't mean it is fully developed in second years. They start understanding some of, for example, what it means to be ashamed. Because we tell children, in Turkish, we keep telling children, it is ayıp, right? Why? Because we are basically socializing them into whatever are the cultural norms that we uphold. And we are trying to tell them that if you do something ayıp, you should either be embarrassed, or if it's something too dire, you should be ashamed. Yes. Okay. And with this also comes emotional self-regulation. Emotional self-regulation is using strategies to adjust our emotional state to a comfortable level of intensity. So if we're feeling too scared, feeling a little bit less scared so that we can function, for example, right? And we might even have to self-regulate our happiness from time to time, don't we? So if I'm practicing names today, yes. Who's sitting next to Deniz again? You are? Yes. Ezgi. Okay. Ezgi has gotten, I want to assume you're good friends with Mohammed here. Are you? Yes, very good. Ezgi and Mohammed go into a midterm, and this is nothing about you, Mohammed, but it's for the purposes of giving an example. Ezgi gets 98, and he gets an 82. It's not bad, but it is not as good as 98 either. Now, she can't be doing cartwheels in front of him, right? She can't be jumping up and down, hugging him, crying about like, you know, this is it, and especially if they maybe studied for the exam together. And she needs to tone it down a little bit, right? And so we don't only regulate our negative emotions like anger, fear, or sadness, but we also regulate sometimes our happiness to our positive emotions. And so this is voluntary and effortful management of emotions, and it requires attention focusing and shifting, inhibiting thoughts and behavior, and planning and taking steps to relieve the situation. As you can see, these 3 steps are not easy, or mostly sometimes even available to young children. So the development of self-regulation starts early on. Even in infancy there is emotional self-regulation, but it keeps developing in primary school years too. So 7, 8-year-olds are still working on this. Yes. Oh, right. Yes. So development of emotional self-regulation in infancy, this actually is a summary of what is to come. That's why I passed it. So newborns rely exclusively on caregivers. So when we're talking about babies just born, a few months old, rely on caregivers to regulate emotions. But between 2 to 4 months of age, baby's tolerance for stimulation increases. The development of the prefrontal cortex is a factor, so is caregiver behavior. So this is, again, it is not all biology, it is not all nurture. Those two interact to produce this favorable outcome. 4 to 6 months, they start, it appears like they're self-soothing, and they start being able to shift their attention like the baby in the video did. So from looking at the mother, the baby shifted to someplace else to regulate emotion because she was getting too overwhelmed. Self-soothing is basically rocking a little bit to feel better, putting a thumb in your mouth to feel better, right? These are self-soothing behaviors. What do we do for self-soothing? We bake cakes, right? Parents are here important. Now, parents are not only important because they interact with their kids, but parents also interpret their the signals their children are giving, right? And those parents who read these signals correctly respond appropriately and fast, also have infants that have a head start in emotional self-regulation. And so that's what it is. And usually parents are good at this. I mean, it takes trial and error. You won't know. You won't know the first time you're interacting with the infant, but you will in time figure out, also from deductive logic, I think, why is this baby crying? Is it that he's hungry? Is it that he needs this poopy diaper changed? Is it that sometimes they're sleepy but can't fall asleep? Or is it that they need stimulation? They need to be talked to, they need to be played with because they are bored like everyone else, right? So those parents who interpret these cues accurately also support their children's emotional self-regulation. Children will start learning, or babies will start learning, that these emotions could be changed via behavior. 12 to 24 months, so 1 to 2 years, language helps, but children still not very good at dealing with anger. For one thing, their language is very limited too, but parents who are patient but also set limits help their children in developing self-regulation. At 2 years of age, toddlers talk extensively about emotions. I have been involved in research where we have analyzed young children's talk. Yes, they talk a lot about being happy, sometimes being angry, and so on and so forth. But how much, say, language sometimes can be deceiving because children start using words earlier than they know their meanings. You would think the other way should be, well, you learn a meaning and then you attach a word to it, but children also parrot a lot. They learn expressions, for example, they use it without knowing what they are. So it doesn't tell us or give us the full story just looking at what children say. We also have to look at what they understand through other means. But by age 3 to 4 years, they use a variety of emotional self-regulation strategies, such as restricting sensory input, closing eyes, or closing ears when they don't want to hear something. They do talk to self, and Vygotsky told us about egocentric speech too, private speech, and they may change their goals. What you just said, for example, the kid wants chocolate. It is not going to be given after determined trying and failing to convince the mother that she should be given a chocolate. The child says, I never wanted chocolate anyways. I really wanted to go out and play. Now this also becomes a strategy, not maybe consciously employed, but employed. Here parents are again key. See, we try not to, it is very easy to think that parents are the key to every single thing. And I think that also puts undue pressure on parents. But for two things, the last chapter, language, and this one, self-regulation, parents really are the key. Do they have to be parents? No. If they're caregivers, for example, if a child is looked after by a grandmother and spends 10 hours a day with that grandmother actually affects. So don't think that this is just a biological father-mother thing. We keep saying parents, assuming that parents are the ones who spend the most time with the kid. But it is in cases where there are nannies or grandparents, aunts, whoever who looks after the baby for long periods of time, caregivers, consistent caregivers, we should think about parents and grandparents, parents and these caregivers, whoever they are. But what kind of parents? These are parents who are patient, explain potentially stressful situations to children in advance, right? Parents who give suggestions and explanations, have children who can use private speech to soothe themselves. Okay. Middle childhood and adolescence, 6 to 8 children start understanding the difference between feeling an emotion and expressing it. We don't express all emotions that we feel, right? And new fear becomes so. In preschool years, children do develop fears, around 4 years of age especially. This is also supported by the fact that their imagination develops. They start being able to imagine things that are not present. But really like detailed imagination. It's not like object permanence, right? And so then like the fear of the dark, for example, 5 years of age, 6 years of age, robbers coming into the house. These are very common childhood fears, by the way. It shows that they're thinking about possibilities. But a new fear comes on the stage once children start primary school, and that is that of failure, right? So academic performance. And it could be failure in the social arena if friends don't like you or they don't invite you to birthday parties, for example. That also becomes a fear. Personal harm, again, being robbed, threats to health, being sick, and global threats like war become more possible to think about. By age 10, children develop two strategies for dealing with emotions: a problem-centered and emotion-centered coping. Problem-centered is, well, situation is changeable. What can I do to solve this problem? And emotion-centered coping is controlling distress while coping with the situation. So one attacks the problem, the other attacks the emotions attached to it. Significant developments in cognitive regulation happens, both in terms of inhibition but also planning. And emotional self-regulation leads to emotional self-efficacy. Self-efficacy is the feeling that you can cope with something, right? So meaning emotional self-efficacy, meaning I can get over this. Ben bunun üstesinden gelebilirim, right? So if you think about like can I actually emotionally deal with 3 midterms in the same week? Display rules. Display rules are the rules about how we go about expressing our emotions. Like we said, we're not allowed to show every emotion we feel on our face. I mean, we are, of course, we are legally allowed, but it doesn't give us social success if we are very honest with our faces. There are some people whose faces don't lie. That's a bad thing, right? Yes, and there are some people with good poker faces too, which is a good thing. For example, for some reason, I think my mom's face can't hide. So if she disapproves something, you see it, it's written here, right? Yes. Her mouth may say something else, but all of her face says a whole different story. I guess when you're a mom, you're allowed to do that. But for us, we try to inhibit ourselves. Preschoolers do have some ability, but parents encourage suppressing negative emotion, especially for boys, right? Boys don't cry, right? They're encouraged to suppress negative emotions more than girls. And girls are encouraged to display it more. Like if they feel they're feeling sad, you know, encourage meaning parents don't tell them be sad, but they talk, they cuddle, they hug, and they show more restraint when they're dealing with their boys. Yes. And those boys become the guys that you date and you don't understand why. They just won't tell you when they're upset. Right. Cultural teaching also plays a role. In some cultures, it is more acceptable to express individual emotions, even if it's not for the betterment of the group, or it doesn't help with group harmony, for example. Yes, we don't have to go over this in the interest of time. I think it's clear. I don't need an explanation there. Understanding emotions. Let me see. Okay, let me give a break right over here, and then we'll be back in 10 minutes to continue.